Why don't you just tell me a little bit about your business?
Sure. So our business is building e-commerce tools for generally small to medium-sized e-commerce businesses who use WooCommerce or Shopify as their platform. And so these tools are anything from export extensions, marketing extensions, anything generally to help a store owner grow and manage their store.
You as a leader of your organization is completely virtual, is it not?
Yep, we're 100% remote. We have been since day one. So 7 years ago, we started. So it's been a while. We're back when remote work was a lot less common than it is today.
Before I ask my specific questions, why don't you just tell me a little bit about you and your business? Just give me a background.
Yeah, so we make software for state-of-the-art veterinary hospitals, and we help kind of with workflow. And the product that we sell is an add-on to their existing system currently. And we're running in about 150 of the most advanced kind of veterinary specialty emergency referral centers in the world. And we've been in business for about almost 3 years. And we're remote first, so we're actually fully distributed, which makes this a little easier for us, given everything that's going on in the world.
And you've been fully distributed the entire length of your business?
Yeah, so like most startups, we started out as a business remote first by necessity. We didn't have income and revenue, and we did it as a way to be scrappy, and now we have revenue, and we could certainly have an office, but we reevaluate it constantly. But we kind of decided we're all in on the remote culture, and we really believe in it.
So first, how would you say that you share your vision and really get people excited and just motivate your team?
Yeah, I think in a remote company, communication is oxygen. You can't communicate enough. You don't have that sort of sense in an office where people are just kind of learning and seeing what's going on. So you kind of have to get very comfortable with communicating early and often. And I think, from our side, it's a couple of things. One of the things I like to do every week is a weekly email to the team, kind of give them a sense of what's going on. Kind of almost like a curated look at what's going on in each area of the business. So in our marketing department, our engineering, product support, kind of just give them a sense of what's going on, what do we care about, what's important, kind of highlighting different things. So I think that's an important thing, to get a sense of what people are interested in, but also then communicating how that aligns to where we're going as a business. So here's our path on that trajectory.
And do you find that people have an issue with all that structure in place? Do people have an issue with that communication, or do they have trouble understanding your vision at all?
I don't think so. I think one of the things that we do in that email is it goes through something called Basecamp, which is sort of a project management type software, but it provides sort of a common thread below it. So a lot of times we'll have people ask about something I mentioned or whatever. Oh, this is really cool. Can you tell me more about this? And we'll actually have some communications, sort of a discussion that goes on around that. So I think that's a really good opportunity for people to get comfortable with kind of where we're going and how we're tracking towards that. And then also a very open forum to ask questions, because every time that someone's comment on that, everyone else is getting an email. So you can kind of see what's going on. So it's almost like a weekly town hall of sorts, but in an asynchronous sense, which gives everyone the opportunity to kind of get into that when it's most convenient for them, which is really important.
Yeah, I like that. And your phrase, communication is oxygen. That's a really great attitude to have, I think.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thing. Everybody worries about that. I feel like when you're a company that isn't remote first, and what I mean by that, is if you're a company that's thinking of moving from one, a partial remote or a mostly in-office culture to remote. And that's really the only time I think that would ever become a problem. Never once in my top 10 list of concerns has been motivating my team. And it's because the culture started that way and has always been that way. And I think that's the easiest way to sum up why. So that doesn't help anybody who's thinking of, dealing with coronavirus, I realize, but that is the honest answer. That's not a concern, because that's always been our culture. And we don't, we all know what that means. But there are a couple things I'd say. One is we hired for people who can handle remote first. Again, does not help anybody who's going through this right now, but that's a big part of one of the ways we set this up correctly. It's a big part of our interview process. We try to dig into people who really are self-starters, people who've had experience dealing with remote, positioning scenarios that might cause concern to a potential hire. And number two, communication, and when I say communication, I guess I mean written communication, is something that I work with every single person on. So we expect strong written communication, and we have it in our company guidelines, we have it in our culture manual, and one of the first books that everybody has to read is a book about written communication in a modern kind of world, and everybody knows I'm a stickler for strong written communication. We don't communicate with so much of us is our written communication. We're a digital company. We have live chat in our application with our team. Our Slack is our office. We call it that. And so that means our written communication determines so much of our culture and our effectiveness and our productivity. And, that's something that's tough. But we constantly hone the importance of written communication and strong written communication.
What does your culture look like, and how do you maintain culture cohesiveness across, in an online environment like this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting in a remote sense, right? Because you don't have that feeling of everyone being in office, everyone working in the same respect. And so a big part of that for us, I'm going to harp on this a lot, is communication. And particularly for us in our remote business, because we're not all in the same time zone. So remote can be, everyone in the same area, but all working from their individual offices. For us, it means everyone's remote, but they're also in different time zones. So we have people all across the United States, Europe, Canada, a couple of people in Asia as well. And so you can't always do things all at once. You can't all get on a Zoom call and kind of communicate everything. We do a little bit of that, but a lot of it is biased towards asynchronous communication. And the really nice part about that is that it's all documented, it's all there. So when someone new comes on board and they're trying to learn the culture, part of it is seeing, okay, how do we operate meetings? How do we talk over email? How do we talk over Slack? But the other big part that they learn is sort of reading all of our documentation. And that's a really important thing, because when we document stuff, so when we make a decision about something, we're going to document that, whether it's in Basecamp or Slack or whatever tool it is, and someone comes on board, they can read back through all of that. So they can read back through all of my weekly updates. They can read back through anytime we decide to make a change to the product, they can read back through, okay, what were we thinking at the time? Why did we make this decision? And so you get to communicate a lot of the culture of, okay, this is important to us, this is not important to us. And people kind of read that over time at their own speed. And that's what kind of maintains that cultural cohesion over time, because they're learning kind of how the organization operates by reading it.
That's all on your on Slack, or do you have that guide somewhere else as well?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a little bit of a challenge over time to manage that, because as our organization has grown, and so last year we doubled in size from 17 to 34 people. And so as that happened, we saw some communication continue to work really well. Some didn't, because we had like an explosion. And then now, previously there was maybe, 10 of those things being created a week, and now there's 50 of them, right? So now you have to think about, how do you organize them? How do you give people the right amount of information, but not so much that they're overwhelmed that they can't find it? And so we've tried to cut down on the amount of tools that we're using. So we try to centralize more of it, but a big part of it is still in Slack, it's in Basecamp, it's in Google Docs. We also have something that we've started from the very beginning called our HQ site, which is, I'd say 95% of it is actually public. And so that's just hq.skyverge.com. And so when someone comes on board, we encourage them, actually even before they come on board during the recruiting process, we'll encourage them to go read it. And so anyone can go read that today, and it sort of documents how we operate, how we think about meetings, how we think about Slack, what are some inside jokes that we have as a company, so that when someone comes on board, and someone says, May in our Slack, MAE in our Slack channel, they understand what that means. It means morning, afternoon, evening, because when you're coming online, it might be someone's evening, but it's your morning. So just things like that, where people get a sense of kind of, okay, this is what it's about. But it's a constant challenge to manage that. But the very first thing you have to do is you have to document. You have to get in the habit of writing it down such that someone can come back and read it later.
Right, that makes sense. And I'm sure that document has probably evolved over time as well.
Yeah, it's fairly substantial. We're constantly reorganizing it, and it's a constant work in progress.
Aren't committed to it. But I guess I'd sum all of that up, especially for companies who are going through this now, by saying you have to prioritize it. You can't let distributed work be a passive thing that is just going to be like working in an office. You have to prioritize it as something that you're constantly working on, you're communicating with your team on, you're hiring for, you're managing by, it's a priority for us.
You say that you would provide performance feedback for people. Are there effective ways in which you can address difficult conversations, such as performance issues?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for us is weekly one-on-ones. I know every business kind of does it differently. For us, it's weekly between a direct report and their manager. fairly unstructured. It's generally driven by the individuals, so they're sort of adding items to their agenda, kind of what they want to cover. But the weekly sort of recap or conversation between those two people and understanding, okay, what are you working on this week? What did you work on last week? How did it go? That timely feedback about, okay, this went well, this didn't go well. Could you have done this better? How do you think about this? That's really, really important. And that sort of forms the basis of how we handle any sort of performance conversations. Because then it's not a situation where it's, you do a quarterly review or biannual or an annual review and you say, hey, that thing you did 6 months ago really wasn't that great. Versus, why didn't you tell me that 6 months ago, right? And so we try to cut all of that out and have that conversation weekly. Sometimes that means it's even more frequent than that, like in Slack saying, hey, you did this thing yesterday and it probably could have done this way. Sometimes, feedback is better shared in sort of a group section, in a weekly one-on-one, but that I think forms the basis of how we think about performance. The other thing I would say there too is and something that we've gotten better at, particularly in the last 6 months, is aligning everyone's work towards team and company goals, such that when someone's working every week, it's okay, are you working towards what your team needs and what the company needs? That alignment helps them feel better about and being motivated about, okay, what I'm doing really matters to the company. Then also for us, from a management side, to make sure that we're kind of having everyone work together and row together towards the same goal.
Like that. And are the one-on-ones with you, or are they with somebody underneath you?
Yeah, so everyone has a weekly one-on-one with their direct manager. Yep. So we have 6 people on our leadership team, and so all their direct reports, they're talking with them every week. Okay. And I have one-on-ones with everyone on the management team as well. So we have the structure kind of applies throughout the whole organization.
Yeah, I mean, we have had one employee that we've terminated since we started, so we have a pretty good track record of hiring. But of course, other things come up from time to time that you need to work with people on. It all comes down, and luckily I have strong coaches who've taught me this, but it all comes down to having the sense of trust with your teammates ahead of time, so that when you need to give that feedback, people understand where you're coming from. And so there's no tricks to that. You have to work at it. You have to build relationships. People have to really trust you. And one of the ways we gain trust in our company is complete transparency. Everybody in this company knows everything about this company. There are no, kind of clicks or tiers where, we're not transparent about everything. Every employee gets our investor letters, things like that. We maintain trust through. And I think that's, transparency in a remote culture is really an important thing. And that's something we focus on.
Do you do any sort of specific, like you personally do any sort of one-on-ones for feedback for your employees, or does?
Oh yeah, we run them just like, we run management just like you would in person, except it's either audio or video, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that, but then there's also opportunities where we do get together as a team. And so once a year we do a team retreat. We think that's really important. And we do kind of an immersive experience. So we rent a giant house, and this year our team got so big we had to rent 2 next to each other, which is, logistical challenges. But we found a place that everybody could get to easily. We have, employees out of the country too. So we had to pick the right place, and then we, for 3 days, holed up and had a mix of fun and work, and that's a really good experience to build trust. We've done that now for the past 2 years. And then we also go, the nature of our business used to be that we go on site to our hospitals every week. We were installing our software. Of course, right now we're doing that virtually, but we mix and match all of our teams. So usually an install is a veterinary expert plus a developer, because that's really our team's half and half. And so we make sure we bring different people together. Sometimes the developers are working on something and it makes sense for them to get together. So they'll go on a trip to an install and then they'll spend a day afterwards meeting, so we try to do stuff like that.
And what about informal communication, such as, your water cooler conversations? Are you able to develop the same benefits as someone in a more co-located team would be able to have? Yeah,
I think so. It's an interesting problem and something that we've tried and experimented with a number of different things over the years to try and get better at it. One thing we have done from the very beginning that we've maintained as we've grown, which we've had to make some adjustments, but it's been pretty well over time, is what we call our weekly hello. So it's a weekly meeting every Monday at noon Eastern time. We have everyone, so the entire company joins in a Zoom call, and everyone goes through it and says what their highlight was for the last week. So this is all non-work stuff. This is meant to be social, sort of a personal time, what their highlight was from last week. And then they answer a question. And the question changes every week. And it's always sort of a silly, sort of irreverent question. Like this past week, it was, what is your favorite shape of pasta? And it's a really, really, I mean, the questions are kind of all over the place, but it's a really great sort of a time for people to not only talk about, hey, I did this, I went out to this thing last week or whatever. And you get a sense, or you get to know people better than, especially if you don't work with them every day, you kind of get to know them a little bit better. And the question provides a really nice opportunity for people to also learn about them. And you like that kind of pasta? Well, that's crazy, or whatever it is.
Right.
And so I think that's really important in a remote sense, because again, you don't get that otherwise. If you're not intentionally kind of putting spaces and opportunities for people to have those sorts of conversations, then they're just not going to happen. So that's a big one. The other thing we've done over the last year or so that's been really helpful is using a tool called Donut, which is a Slack app that pairs 3 random people up every 3 weeks for 30 minutes and for a non-work Zoom conversation. So it's like scheduled sort of social time, and there's no agenda, there's no anything for those conversations. Is again just an opportunity to kind of replicate that sense of an office. You get to know different people, but you kind of have to, in a remote sense, you find you have to make a lot of intentionality around that, because if you don't set space aside for it, if you don't set time, you don't encourage and kind of almost require people to do that, then it doesn't happen. So those are the kind of the things that have worked really well for us.
And so is that outlined in the document you referenced, your culture document?
Yeah, the donut chats are part of, I'm forgetting exactly what section of our wiki it's in, probably in the Slack section or whatnot, but it specifies that exact sort of thing. Yeah. And sometimes we do encourage like prompting questions, again, like bring 3 questions. What's your favorite kind of music, or just sort of things, icebreaker questions called to kick those conversations off.
Yeah.
No, that's definitely where you hit some walls, right? And our team's experimented with some stuff like, we have a Slack channel for just jibber jabber. We have, we tried, but it failed, a water cooler hour on Zoom where anybody can pop in. Turns out nobody really used it, except for the people proposing it. But that's okay. I mean, that's not, it's not something that, it's a downside, I agree, but it's not an essential thing that you can't run a business around. The biggest thing that I've found that works is encourage people when we do a weekly team call, which is the last thing I never mentioned before. So we do a weekly all hands. It's mandated to be video, which we found really helps. And in this weekly all hands, we've encouraged everybody to join 10 minutes before if you're free and catch up. And that's been the most effective. And so like this morning, I couldn't join except for 2 minutes before, and I got on and the whole team was there like chatting it up,
This is a question for you personally. Being a leader, is oftentimes lonely. It's oftentimes, lonely at the top, as they say.
Yeah.
Do you think that being the leader of a remote organization is, any more isolating? And if so, what do you do to feel more connected or supported?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it would be more isolating. I think it's just different in that respect. And of course you get better at sort of, in a remote sense, everyone gets better at working sort of individually, right, over time. I think for me, what's been really helpful and something that we've started, there's 2 things rather. One thing that we've done from the very beginning, which was quarterly meetups with our leadership team. And so we actually, we get out of our individual places, we fly somewhere, and we kind of meet as a team. That's really helpful. Of course, with the current situation, we actually just had one last week. I don't know, the next quarter we'll be doing that, but that's really helpful to kind of stay connected and get kind of reset every 90 days. The other thing that we do is a weekly leadership meeting, which helps me stay connected to what's going on with our leadership team and kind of help us work together as a team. And the last thing I'd say there that helps me stay connected to the entire team is what we call skip level one-on-ones. And so that's an opportunity for me once a quarter to talk with everyone on our team, and just kind of hear from them directly of what's going on. And I think that's something that we've only really started doing recently, but it's been incredibly valuable because I get to hear from everyone individually, kind of what do they think is going on? What are they seeing on the front lines that maybe I'm not seeing, from where I'm sitting with the information that I'm looking at. And I think that really helps me stay connected to the rest of the team to kind of get a pulse of what's happening.
And support those ones.
It is. I would say having strong advisors is, one thing that's been really good for me. Obviously family support, my spouse I talk to about, a lot of things. So, but, for me, the founders therapy sessions with other founders, which I've set up my kind of own group for, and then advisors. All of our investors are really advisors to me, and I can call them at any point. They've all reached out in the middle of this crisis. So, just having safe people to talk to about the challenges maybe I'm going through has always been a real big benefit.
And last question here for you. So what advice would you give to a company who is suddenly thrown in a situation where they must find that they have to fully adapt, a fully remote workforce, having never done it before?
Yeah, I think the first thing that you can do is take whatever processes, whatever systems that you have, and map them to whatever the remote equivalent might be. And so if you're already doing, a weekly meeting with your team, if you're already doing daily meetings or whatever it is, take that and just do the equivalent remote sense. So have weekly Zoom meetings or have daily Zoom meetings, whatever it may be. At the same time, be willing to experiment and change when it doesn't make sense anymore. So maybe that daily meeting that you had maybe doesn't make sense. Maybe you don't need to meet. Maybe it's an email now. So you have to be very willing to identify what's working in a remote sense of, okay, it worked when we were in office, but it doesn't work this way. So we need to change and adapt to that. I think it's a really great opportunity to kind of take a look at what changes you can make. And I also think the other important thing, if especially your whole team is being thrust into that environment, is that everyone's going to respond differently to that. And so be constantly communicating with your team, be understanding who's struggling, who needs help. When we hire people who have never worked remotely before, we almost inevitably find that some people, everyone has challenges with it if it's the first time they're doing it. Some people have a lot of problems disconnecting, so they'll just work all day, every day, and they just won't shut off. Other people have challenges with being distracted. Other people, everyone's different in that respect. So you kind of have to coach that individually. And so if you're being thrust into this situation, then you want to talk to everyone individually and say, how is this going? Where can I coach and kind of help you with whatever challenges you might be having.
Okay, so coaching. So in summary, coaching people, but also mapping out those processes, like you said, and try to structure your current environment as much as it used to be in person. How you can map it to be a digital representation of that process.
Exactly. I don't think it's not a good time to dramatically change everything, right? So you want to keep, maybe 80% of what you've done before, just use the digital equivalent of it. And the other 20% is a good opportunity to look at, do you need to, maybe there is opportunities to change it, make it more efficient, make it more productive, whatever that may be. And maybe, in closing, again, communication is oxygen. So you can't, if you feel like you're over communicating, you're probably just at the point where you need to communicate a little bit more. Because again, you don't get any of that sense of people just information disseminates. If you don't share it, people don't know it. So you have to constantly keep that in mind, that you have to tell people what's going on. You have to tell people multiple times in multiple avenues. So if you say it in Slack, send an email. If you send an email, say it in Slack, and then have a meeting. So
is there such thing as over communication?
I don't think so. I've not found that. I've not found somewhere where it's like, all right, we get it. We've not hit that point ourselves yet. So maybe there is, but we haven't hit it.
Would you recommend they proceed?
I'd recommend they go to Amazon and buy the book Rework and read it. It'll take you maybe 2 hours. It's really fast. It's written by the folks at Basecamp. Basecamp really has written the book on remote work, and then I would follow the Signal versus Noise blog. It's a completely different way to think about the business world, and it's not going to resonate with everybody, but it certainly does with us. And that's really the first book I read where I was like, okay, remote work can work. And so Rework would be what I'd tell them.